Sustainability is a term we hear chucked around a lot in modern life. It seems to crop up everywhere, from the manifestos of climate activists and politicians on the campaign trail to breakfast cereal and coffee beans. You even hear it used in marketing campaigns by major gas and oil companies. But what does it really mean? It's hard not to suspect that when David Attenborough uses the term, he has something quite different in mind to when the boss of Shell Oil talks about it. So, to try and get a clearer idea, we spoke to experts at the University of Sheffield's Arts and Humanities faculty to try to get to the bottom of what sustainability really means.
So sustainability is defined by the UN World Commission for Environment and Development as a way of ensuring that we meet the present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So for example, as human beings, we've been using natural resources at an unsustainable rate and often deploying processes that are irresponsible so that waterways have become polluted, forests depleted and biodiversity lost. And this is so it's really urgent that we find ways of living in a more sustainable way, both for ourselves and for future generations. So the arts and humanities can help us understand how we got to this present crisis and how processes and practices and values have become part of our social and cultural norms and even the language that we use. But also having understood that, we can start to see how we can unpick and change the narrative. So for example, it's not just enough to understand how many plastic bottles have been used only once and not recycled. We need to start understanding what language sort of helps people feel motivated and inspired to start to do something about their own behaviours and to influence also the behaviours of others.
We know that trees and forests play a major role in the fight against climate change. They remove CO2 from the atmosphere, reduce flooding and support biodiversity. However, despite a range of global initiatives designed to protect trees on these grounds, deforestation continues to occur at an alarming rate in order to provide space for agriculture, mining, and resources for manufacturing goods. Increasingly, experts argue that in order to make real progress, a fundamental change in the way we think about forests is needed. After all, trees aren't only vital practical use in the fight against climate change, they're also a powerful reminder of why this is a fight worth having, and a symbol of humanity's essential connection to the natural world.
The public discourse around trees and forests is often oriented towards economics and ecology, and that is obviously super important, but I'm really interested in a holistic understanding of trees and forests that embraces approaches from the arts and humanities to show how culture creates much deeper senses of the meaning and value of woodlands, for example. So when we had the big tree protests in Sheffield a few years back, there's a lot of debate about stormwater runoff, about carbon sequestration, but people who were involved in the campaign to save Sheffield's street trees were often motivated by a sense of the beauty of the trees, how they were part of their memory of the spaces they grew up in, how they helped make the place something that was meaningful to them. And those are really important ideas. These are what attach us to the natural environment and to the creatures who live there in a much more deeply meaningful way than thinking about the economics of it does. And that, I think, is why the front line of activist campaigns about trees and woodlands are always already necessarily cultural. We see that in Indigenous campaigns about poles removal, for example, when you have a really stark clash between different worldviews, the economic exploitation of places, soybean production, for example, versus centuries-old cosmologies, where the whole idea of being human and inhabiting a space is closely involved with ideas of the sacred connected to the natural world. So I think it's absolutely central that we understand that the woodland is not a machine for absorbing carbon. It's a life world, it's a culture, it's much more than what the accountants might represent it as being.
And of course, it's not just the natural world which we need to change our thinking about. We also need to achieve dramatic shifts in how we understand the wider impact of commonplace human behaviour. For example, many of the goods and commodities we come across in everyday life are produced unsustainably and often unethically. These practices can be driving factors in climate change, as well as global inequality and exploitation. One particularly prominent example of this is the fast fashion industry, which in recent years has been prompting young people in particular to rethink how they buy clothing.
The module on fast fashion explores the environmental, the social and the ethical consequences of the mass production of clothing at cheap cost. So we analyze the fast fashion process starting from the extraction of the raw materials, the production of the garments, the transport to take them to the markets, and then their final disposal. During the semester we watch a film which is called The True Cost, in which the students actually see the workers working incredible hours for very basic wages that are below what would be considered the minimum wage, the impact that dealing with chemicals and toxic substances has actually on the health of the humans, and at the end they also see the impact that it has on the environment for the waters full of chemicals that gets released in rivers and seas, the input of microplastics into the sea and the rivers, the impact that it has on the animal life, and at the end of the cycle on us as well when we eat the animals. I am very optimistic for the future because I see that the younger generation are much more sensitive to these issues than, for example, I was when I was their age. They are more ready to act and they become more active. Once they are aware of the problem, they try to find solutions, they discuss them, and sometimes they come to me with some solutions that maybe I hadn't thought of, and they rethink the whole way they have to buy clothes and what they do with their clothes once they don't want to wear them anymore.
Given the huge influence humanity now has on the Earth, and the enormous scientific and technological advancements that have been made in recent years, many experts agree that humanity does have the power to turn back the tide on climate change. However, simply having the right tools and resources isn't enough. People, institutions, and organisations with the power to make real change often need to be convinced to take action. This is where the emotive and persuasive power of art, culture, and language is vital. We spoke to a researcher, for example, looking at how we can use language to reduce plastic pollution.
In the global north, we rarely see the impact of plastics pollution up close. We tend to be very good at putting our plastics in the right bin and recycling and so on. But we don't see the impact that has on the global south, where most of that waste ends up ultimately floating in the ocean and so on. And it's important to remember as well that only about 9% of plastics is ever recycled. The rest of it goes to be incinerated or becomes waste in the ocean. And on a bigger scale, plastics are contributing to global warming and global CO2 emissions because of the energy and so on that are associated with producing and recycling plastic. We looked at a huge amount of language produced in everyday settings. We collected over 4.5 million words of everyday language about plastics. And we were comparing particularly the language that supermarkets, retailers and manufacturers use around plastics with the language that their consumers and customers use on a day-to-day basis. And we found that there were an awful lot of mismatches in how that language was used, and that the way that retailers and manufacturers see their role in plastics pollution and talk about that doesn't match with how consumers see it, and with the high levels of frustration and anger that consumers feel about the plastics problem. One of the pieces of advice that we've been giving large organisations about how they talk about plastics is to try to give more recognition to the everyday choices and actions that consumers make around plastics, whether that's recycling or, more importantly, with reuse, and to try and get away from the language that they've been using up to this point, which has been kind of based on marketing and advertising language and is very much about building brand loyalty and that kind of thing. But that doesn't help to shift consumer behaviour and to move people's choices to more pro-environmental choices over the long term.
There's a general consensus that the fight for sustainability is a fight for the environment we call home, the food we eat, and the resources we use to produce the energy that keeps us warm, safe, and connected. In short, it's a fight for survival. But it's also more than that. It's a fight to protect the things that bring us fascination, joy, community, and wonder. For example, the natural world can have a remarkable impact on our mental health, well-being, and our sense of place and belonging. Connecting with this emotional attachment to the natural world can in turn be a powerful motivation to do whatever we can to protect the environment.
We live in a time of terrible health inequalities where even across our city, people's lifespan can differ by as much as 10%. Part of raising health in all parts of the city is definitely about accessing green spaces, and it's quite clear across our city that some areas where health indexes are higher have more green spaces as well. So we definitely need to work from a health perspective on protecting our green spaces. Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust were involved in a pilot project whereby GPs could prescribe access to nature, to green and blue spaces, as a way of increasing well-being, and it was particularly for people who had quite long-term mental health issues. So they had been working on this pilot project across Sheffield and Bassetlaw area, and they'd noticed how it had really made a difference to people's well-being to spend some time once a week with a group out in the countryside, perhaps bird watching or going for walks or going to the llama farm. But what they hadn't managed to do in that project was to capture the stories that people were telling them. They had no idea that when they were going to go out with these groups, they were going to hear these incredible stories about somebody perhaps who had fallen in love with beavers, someone else who used to follow owls everywhere. So they asked us whether we would be able to join in on this project with them and actually record the stories which they were hearing about people, well-being and nature and the connection between the three. When we talk about stories, we're not really saying tell us the beginning and middle and end of your story that you have with nature, because we were accompanying them on these trips to different places. It might just be that someone would turn around to us and say, oh, this reminds me of when I was 5 years old and before I went to school I had to go and herd the goats before I was allowed to go to school in Jamaica, and then when I came to the UK something happened, and it's only now that I'm connecting back with nature again, for example. Working in this project, we could actually see that people's connection with nature was helping their well-being, but it was also helping them take action for nature and care for nature and value it more. And those are some examples of the small ways in which we can actually feel a bit more empowered to make a difference.
Animals and wildlife are another central part of the conversation around sustainability and the climate crisis. We know, for example, that the meat industry uses enormous quantities of water, emits masses of carbon dioxide, and often relies on deforestation. We also know that a vast number of animal species now face extinction. As well as changes to the relevant industries and policies, this is yet another signal for cultural change. Many experts believe we need to learn how we can live more harmoniously with animals. However, how we achieve this is often a deeply personal matter. Some experts believe that looking to art can help us reflect on how we can change our relationship with wildlife in a way that's right for us.
I think it's certainly the case for me that literature doesn't offer any straightforward answers for how to respond to climate change, or how to end the climate crisis, or how we might arrive at a sustainable future. what it does, certainly the work that I'm interested in tends to do, is pull us away from and ask us to think critically about forms of human-animal relation that commodify animals, or turn them, generalise them, stereotype them, and allow us to deflect from taking their individual preferences seriously. In the Kestrel for Nave, which is filmed as Kes, what really interests me about that story is the way in which it's very interested in exploring the individual boy, Billy Casper's freedom, his self-development, and how in order to genuinely pursue his own freedom, to genuinely become who he wants to be, he has to seek out sort of society, a sociality with an animal. And it really matters to Billy that the Kestrel retains a certain autonomy from him. But I think in my reading of the book, there remains a certain control. Billy only is able to have the Kestrel because he has gone and stolen an egg from the nest. For me, the tragedy is that there is no arrangement offered for him to genuinely live in freedom with the Kestrel, for both of them to pursue their own goals. That just isn't possible.
Many experts now argue that since the Industrial Revolution, human activity has had the most significant impact on the Earth's environment. Where before natural forces such as volcanoes, earthquakes and storms would shape the world we live in, it's now human activity that's driving change, for good as well as for bad. This era has been dubbed the Anthropocene.
Just as the Anthropocene shows us that humans have the capacity, even the power, to become the dominant force in Earth systems, the dominant force affecting Earth systems and affecting nature, we can turn that around actually, and maybe we can start to think that it might be a really exciting time to be alive on Earth, to be in the position or to be part of shaping our future in a positive way. In previous centuries, previous millennia if you like, human beings have really felt themselves to be at the mercy of nature. But now we are actually in the position, really for the first time in human history, to be able to really act with purpose, to have significant impacts on our own circumstances in a positive way. I think alongside that there needs to be cultural shifts in our understanding of our own place on Earth as individuals, as communities, families, societies, that we understand ourselves. Each person is an important part of the global population, in the sense that we can all have a positive impact should we so desire, and that we all have a material and important impact on Earth systems through what we do on a day-to-day basis.
My main takeaway from talking to the university's researchers has been that arriving at an in-depth understanding of sustainability is surprisingly complex. On the surface, it's a matter of making changes so that we use the Earth's resources at a rate which allows them to replenish and not cause harm to the environment. For example, we can fly less, use renewable energy sources, avoid single-use plastics, and buy responsibly sourced goods. However, to achieve this on a scale that's needed to turn back the tide on climate change, we also need to understand the systems and beliefs which underpin the behaviours that have brought us to this point, the brink of catastrophe. In many cases, we need to rethink how we value and understand the natural world and humanity's place in it.